State Representative Salman Bhojani of Euless, thank you so much and welcome to Island Politics. Happy New Year.
Thanks for having me. Happy New Year to you too as well.
So here we are, the new legislative session is upon us, and my question to you is the very first vote is for Speaker. And I saw your name on a list for supporting Republican Dustin Burrows. Is that an accurate list? And if so, why? Because there's also a Democrat in the race, as you know.
Yes, so it is, I don't know about the list being accurate, but I am supporting Chairman Dustin Burrows for sure.
Why?
So he reached out earlier on. So first of all, let's talk about it. There are three candidates for Speaker. You have Representative Ana Maria Ramos, Chairman Dustin Burrows, and Representative David Cook. I am, as you know, a Democrat, and we're in the minority. So we're going to most likely have to elect a Republican Speaker. And so that gives us two candidates remaining. Chairman Dustin Burrows reached out to me much in advance and said that he would uphold the tradition of the House, right, where both parties have a seat at the table. And that meant a lot to me because it is really important that all 150 state representatives are equal and they get equal say because think about it, we represent our communities in our districts. And I want a speaker that's going to give effect to all of those constituents. It's not about me personally having a seat at the table, but it's also about my constituents having a seat at the table. And they're not just Democrats, right? Just because I'm a Democrat, I have 40% Republicans in my district who actually I knocked on doors for during this, my last election because I didn't have a Republican opponent. And so I knocked on their doors and I said, what can I do for you as much as I did in the Democratic voters as well? And so I feel like I want a speaker that's going to uphold the tradition of the House, that will make sure that we respect every single member for who they are and not the party that they belong to. That way we have a meaningful discussion because not all ideas great ideas come from one party, right? We're a bipartisan state, we should be able to move Texas forward, not to the right or not to the left.
And so when you say upholding the traditions of the House, are you specifically talking about Democrats being able to serve as committee chairs? Did he make that promise?
No, by the way, nobody has made any promises, just conversations we've had, right? And I feel that whether Democrats have chairmanship or not, I'm not sure that's the number one thing for Democrats, right? It may either, both speakers, candidates may not provide that, but I'm more interested in having a meaningful discussion and meaningful seat at the table and say as to how the legislation goes on in the House.
And what does that mean for you then, when you say that, as far as a seat at the table? So what does that mean when crafting bills?
I think, listening to each member, whether they're Democrat or Republican, is really important. Making sure that the major policies of both parties or both people, I guess, get given effect, right, heard in the House floor. The bills that are priority for both parties should be heard in committee. And so that's what I'm talking about, having a meaningful say and not just saying, okay, we're not going to have any Democratic bills pass in the House at all. And that's going to be detrimental for the state of Texas.
And so how confident are you that that's going to take place? And would that be a change from Speaker Phelan?
I'm not sure, that's something that I'm sort of thinking about myself right now, right? And keeping, all sort of ideas open. But I feel like, Chairman Dustin Burrows and his team has given that assurance that they will uphold that tradition of the House and allow Democrats to have a meaningful say in the process.
On Monday, the Texas Comptroller is going to formalize how much the state has as far as a surplus. And the estimates that we've seen and heard so far are about $20 billion. How do you think state lawmakers should deal with that?
I think we should deal with that like any family household in Texas or any business, right? Because we have to save up for rainy days. We have to save up for big expenses that are going to happen in the future.
Well, that's separate from the rainy day fund,
right.
Which I think is going to have like $25 billion.
Exactly.
Right. So,
right.
But there are restrictions on that money.
Right.
But as far as a surplus, $20 billion so far.
Yeah.
What do you think the state should do? I mean, there's a lot of talk about continuing more property tax relief, perhaps other relief for Texans who are not property owners, infrastructure. So where are you on that?
Yeah, I think first of all, we need to think about long-term and short-term. So long-term, let's say our water infrastructure is really in need of repair, right, and fixing. And that's going to cost, I think, some estimates say $150 billion in the next 50 years. So we need to make sure that we start maybe an endowment or some fund for making sure the water we have, that's a really important resource we have, right? Without water, there's nothing. And families, businesses, nothing, right? So it's really important. The second thing is, let's talk about it right now. Our schools are not funded well, right? They're not fully funded. Our teachers are not getting enough salaries. We need to pay teachers a living wage. And so we need to increase the basic allotment. That would be really important to fund. Things like mental health facilities. In Tarrant County specifically, we don't have a mental health facility for inmates. And so we are using another facility outside our county. And so the people have to drive all that. So there's so much infrastructure, obviously roads and water and energy grid. The electric grid is also really important. So that's, and then we may think about also giving property tax relief like we did last session. That's a historic $18 billion, right? Brought down the tax rate, reduced the franchise tax for a lot of small businesses. But I think we want to make sure that right now property tax needs to be fixed in a meaningful way, right?
And what do you mean when you say that?
I feel like it's really expensive. As I've knocked on so many thousands of doors in my district, I've heard repeatedly that property taxes are sometimes getting people not to own a home anymore. And those that are renting are having such high rent. So we need to do a meaningful reduction in property taxes while funding our schools, because even right now with increase in property taxes, our schools are not funded. And that property tax is supposed to be going to schools. And so I feel like our system needs to improve, and we need to look more deeply into ways that we can make it more efficient.
Do you have any ideas as far as when you talk about the property tax burden and home ownership? Obviously, they raised, how much was exempt, right? The exemption
right, exactly.
is up.
Yes.
So are you talking further increases in the exemption, or is there something else? Because there was a lot of debate during the last session about whether exemptions or perhaps lowering the cap, how much the increase could be, putting a cap on it. So where are you on that?
I'm not sure what one would be better, but I feel like we just need to make sure that we give property tax sort of relief not just to homeowners but also to renters. Last time we didn't do that, right? I think one of the representatives had a good bill last session during the special session saying that let's give renters some relief and they can apply and they get 25% or something of last year's property taxes. We can give them a refund. That's what I'm talking about, maybe having renters relief as well as homeowners relief. Now homeowners relief doesn't have to be exemption, homestead exemption, but it could be some other way that we can figure out a long-term solution for property taxes, right? Because it's so getting expensive that people are moving out of the state or not able to afford a home or rent anymore.
I seem to remember discussion about, rent, doing something for renters. And I remember the lieutenant governor saying something to the effect where the state can't hand out direct, cash back to people in that way. And so, is that something that you think needs to be looked at?
Absolutely. I mean, 64% of my district is composed of renters, right? So I do need to fight for my constituents to make sure that they have a meaningful relief from rent. And if you give, it's nice to say that, okay, we'll give the landlords a property tax relief and then they'll pass it on to tenants. That may or may not happen, right? So we need to have a meaningful way of giving a relief to renters in this.
You spoke about public schools and raising the basic allotment, basically what school districts receive per student.
Yes.
And the last time it was raised was 2019. And it's a little over $6,100 now. Do you have a number in mind of how much the increase should be?
I don't have a number in mind, but we do need to meaningfully increase that. It's been, like you said, 2019, and we are the 43rd in the entire nation in terms of per pupil, per student funding. And so we're in the bottom, right? I want to see Texas always on the top for good things. Obviously, we can stay in the bottom for bad things, but this is something that is really important because 96% of Texas kids are attending our public schools. So it's really important that we give them the funding that they deserve, especially when we think about early childhood education, right? We have half-day funding for 4-year-olds in preschool, but we have full-day programs available, but we only fund half-days. So I filed a bill this session, and I also did last session, to fully fund our 4-year-old early childhood education program.
Preschool.
Right, preschool, and start at 3 years. Because it's so important, every dollar that's, and this is documented, it's fact that every dollar that's spent in early childhood education is going to reap you so much benefits down the road. And even right now, when, like, I'll talk about my kids. Both of my kids went through preschool and early childhood education programs, like Montessori program, when they were 18 months old. And when they started kindergarten, they were leaps and bounds ahead of their colleagues or peers in kindergarten. And they're able to get better jobs, they're able to get better education, better opportunities because they started so early. And kids are sponges when they're born. I think we're giving so much gap to when we start educating them. They're learning, they can learn so much faster and so much earlier.
Was there a price tag attached to the bill?
No, that's going to happen with, when they look at, because last year I did 4-year-old fully funded. This time I'm saying let's do 3-year-old as well.
In addition?
In addition to that, yeah.
But was there a price tag attached to your bill last time with the 4?
Yeah, I don't know exactly what the number was like, but it wasn't too outrageous that we can't afford it. And that's what I'm talking about, right? When we have a surplus, right? These are the things that we can fund. Early childhood education is so important.
Teacher salaries,
yes.
A lot of people, Republicans and Democrats, agree
yes.
that teachers should get a raise. So do you think that the state should set aside specific dollars requiring the school districts, to fund teacher pay raises?
We can do that. I feel local control is good because allowing the school districts to make that decision, and I think 70% of their budget anyways goes to salaries, right? So I feel like they will do the right thing, and because in order to attract teachers right now, we need to pay them a living wage, and that's what all districts like HEB ISD and Arlington ISD, that's what they're telling me, that give us more funding per student, and maybe we can also change it to enrollment-based funding, so that way, we can get more money to them, and then increase the basic allotment and allow them to make the decision on the increasing teacher salaries.
When I spoke recently with Texas Education Agency Chair, or the Executive Director, Mike Morath, he really does not like the idea of funding schools based on enrollment at the beginning of the year. He prefers having it based on attendance, which it is now, because he said the school districts still need to have an incentive to make sure these students are showing up to school. So what do you say to that?
Let's find a middle ground, right? I think so long as we are doing the right thing by funding our schools, I think we can agree on what metrics should that be. Because that's something nuances that we can, and I agree, right? We want to make sure that school districts are incentivized to make sure that the kids are actually attending school, right? Because what's good is it going to do if 10% of the kids are not coming to the school and then we're still funding based on just an enrollment.
Border security, as you know, President-elect Trump is about to take office in his second administration. He has promised to crack down at the southern border, and Governor Abbott said after the election in November that once the federal government ramps up its border security program, perhaps the state would be able to spend less on its border security efforts. What do you make of that?
I think that'd be great to spend less on border security. That's something that the federal government should handle for us, right? That's within the purview of that, and let's save that dollars to be spent in schools and other things that we talked about today. But I think the border communities need to feel safe, so I understand that. But as an immigrant myself, I feel like immigrants come to America, come to Texas and improve our state so much more. They're the job creators of the future, like myself, right? I came to America when I was 19 years old, worked at gas stations, mopping floors for $6 an hour. But today I employ hundreds of people in my hotels, in my law firm, in my title company, in all the private equity business that I have. And that's what immigrants do, generally speaking. So the talk about immigrants taking jobs away from Americans, I think that's I don't subscribe to that thought. But I feel like, as a business owner, we do need to allow immigrants to come into our state, to our country, to be able to sustain our workforce needs. Because we're, demographically speaking, we're not producing enough workforce or enough babies in order to, in the future, meeting all the demands of the businesses. Like in all of my businesses, we're hiring right now, right? It's such a tight labor market, but we need to have good labor come in, like H-1B, right? It's on the news right now a lot. I think it's a really good program, right? It brings so many people from around the country to give, good labor and talent from around the world to stay here and work in America.
And Republicans are going to have that, as you said, on Capitol Hill. They're going to be discussing all that. But they also say that what they're talking about when they talk about border security is illegal immigration, people crossing illegally, not legally. And so I'm wondering, as far as that point is concerned, is there a difference?
I mean, there is a difference, but I don't think we're getting scores of illegal immigrants coming into our state, in our country, right? I think.
Well, there were record numbers in the last 4 years.
But it's gone significantly down,
Yes,
and I think
it has.
President Biden had a bill, or Congress had a bill at that time, that would significantly deter illegal immigrants from coming in. And because of political issues that, and the election going on, one party said not to endorse that bill. And so I think they will find a solution in the federal government. And what I'm trying to say is that let's save these precious taxpayer dollars and give it to things that are needed the most, like education, healthcare, like a mental health, the cancer research center that we have. I mean, there's so many great things that we can fund and allow the people that are working at the borders from Texas go back to their families, right? There's so many record suicides, so many people are just there stationed doing when the federal government should be doing that.
Last question, if you had any other top priority other than what we discussed, what would that be?
I think religious freedom is important to me. That's something that I want to try to be the champion for in the House, in the legislature. I obviously swore on a historic Quran when I got sworn in last session, became the first Muslim elected there. And I feel like I want to fight for all religious traditions because there's so much value in that. And there's so many common things that we have in each of the faiths. And so I brought the first Jewish Torah to the chapel at the Capitol, brought the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu scripture, as well as the Quran. And I want to continue that notion of respecting and celebrating faith traditions in our state of Texas and making sure that they're protected.
State Representative Salman Bhojani of Euless, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate it.
Appreciate it.